Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, a big question, will 3 Mile Island reopen? But first, journalist Marc Levy joins me, and we're going to take a look at the big political and government stories of the week. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, Marc Levy from the Associated Press. I tell you, one of the big issues, you vote by mail, and there's a big question about the date on the outer envelope. Do I have that correct?
That's right.
So what's the issue, and how is it going to get resolved?
So this has been an ongoing sore subject. It's been litigated in the courts for years now, the last 4 years at least. And what we have now is a filing before the state Supreme Court by a group of left-leaning groups and voting rights groups asking the state Supreme Court to require counties to count mail-in ballots regardless if the voter forgot to write the date on the outer envelope, or for instance, if they wrote a wrong date. Under the law, you must sign and date your mail-in ballot.
Yeah.
But in the last 4 years, since Pennsylvania greatly expanded voting by mail, tens of thousands of ballots have come in without a date or without, some people will write their birthday. I guess you're supposed to actually write the date that you're signing it and filling out the ballot. And so counties have been throwing those out under a series of court decisions. Now these groups are trying to get the court to say it's a violation of the constitutional right to vote to throw out a ballot because it's missing a date. And what they say is that writing a date on it is inconsequential to determining whether the ballot came in on time to the county or whether the voter was registered to vote.
Yeah.
So we may see action by the state Supreme Court. They don't have to take the case, but this is one of 3 cases that are now before it that directly deal with mail-in ballots. And it's a lot like the 2020 election when the state Supreme Court was dealing with a lot of election-related cases before it, before the election.
The importance of voting can't be exaggerated, I don't think, in a democracy. And if you have the wrong date on the outer envelope, or you don't have a date, does that really make sense? In my humble judgment, I'd be a little cautious about saying you lose your vote because you didn't date it properly or you failed to date it.
Right, and so what the plaintiffs in these cases say is they're pointing to a string of court decisions that have, lower court decisions that have found that there is no real purpose to that date in determining a voter's eligibility to vote or determining whether the ballot was eligible, came in on time before polls close. Republicans who helped write the law in the legislature say that this is a voting safeguard. So the state Supreme Court may or may not take action on it. It has had this case before, but not on the ground of whether this violates the constitutional right to vote.
Has this become partisan?
It's very partisan because about 3/4 of mail-in ballots are being cast by Democrats in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And both sides will trace that gap back to Donald Trump in 2020 when he started baselessly saying that mail-in voting is rife with fraud and that people shouldn't vote that way and that Democrats would use mail-in voting to steal the election.
Right.
There's no evidence that mail-in voting has any sort of a significant track record of fraud or that it was used to steal the election.
Yeah. So basically, has this been resolved?
No, and we may not know whether it's going to be resolved. For one thing, the court doesn't have to take this case. And if it does rule, it doesn't necessarily have to rule before the November 5th election. Remember, this case was brought to it 6 weeks before the election, even though various iterations of this case have been percolating in the courts. Republicans also have a case before the state Supreme Court where they are asking it to tell counties that they are not allowed to let people fix their ballot if they made sort of a paperwork error, like they left off the date or they left off a signature, and people are not allowed to cast a provisional ballot in its place. So we have these dueling cases before the state Supreme Court. This could make a difference of thousands and thousands of votes in a key battleground state just weeks before the election.
Yeah. Well, we're going to run to a break. Automatic voter registration in Pennsylvania, another question before the legislature and before all of us, I take it, since it involves the voters in the state. Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we're chatting about voting and election issues with Marc Levy with the Associated Press. Remember, November 5, that's the date when we go to the polls, I think, Mark. I always try to remember that. At any rate, let's talk a little bit about automatic voter registration in Pennsylvania. That's another issue that's being debated, correct?
Right. So what we have now is the Auditor General, independently elected Republican Tim DeFore, has just announced that he's going to audit it.
Audit what?
Audit automatic voter registration, which is essentially when you are at a PennDOT office getting a driver's license, it says we're going to register you to vote, or we're going to update your voter registration data unless you say not to. All right, it's a switch from previous years when it said you would see a screen that said, "Do you want to register to vote, or do you want to update your voter registration data?" So it's a change that the state made under Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro a year ago. Tim DeFore now says he's going to audit it, but he's also going to audit whether or not non-citizens are registering to vote. And this hits on a key election year talking point for Republicans that goes back to Donald Trump in January, saying that Democrats were allowing illegal immigrants into the country so that they could register them to vote and steal the election. And so for Tim DeFore to announce this audit just barely 6 weeks before the election, Democrats are accusing him of trying to destroy confidence in elections and playing partisan politics with his office. He says he is not. He is on the ballot as well on November 5th. He's running for another 4-year term against Democratic State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta of Philadelphia. So that has thrust a very hot-button issue into what is usually a very sleepy Auditor General's race.
The state treasurer is often sleepier, I think. I don't mean that meanly. I'm just saying the topics and how they get presented to the voters by the candidates.
Yeah, the issues are often sort of kind of inside baseball in both offices.
That's a good point.
It's tough for reporters to write about them. It's tough to draw distinctions between candidates. And usually people vote down the ballot by party.
Before I let you go, Pennsylvania is a key battleground state in the presidential election.
It is a key battleground state. Kamala Harris was just here talking about her economic agenda in Pittsburgh. There's a reason why she was in Pittsburgh delivering that economic message there, because it's such a dynamic and important political part of the state. Donald Trump is returning to Pennsylvania on October 5th, we are told, to Butler, the site of where an assassin tried to, or a would-be assassin tried to shoot him in Butler a couple months ago. So, you know, their surrogates, their vice presidential nominees are here every other day practically. Pennsylvania is perhaps the most important state in the election. It is the swing state with the most electoral votes to give. That's 19. And it has played an outsized role in picking a president the last few elections, and it's expected to play that role again on November 5th.
Well, look, I want to thank you for the update. All right, coming up, we're going to 3 Mile Island. Will it reopen? A big story and a big event if it occurs.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, 3 Mile Island, the plant was closed in 2019, and the big question now is, will it reopen? Joining me to talk about that and more is Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. Terry, welcome back.
Thank you, Terry. Good to be here.
All right. Well, let's talk first of all about the decision to close in 2019. First of all, explain to people what 3 Mile Island, for the people who may be.
Yeah, there's probably aren't too many people that don't know,
right,
about 3 Mile Island. But yeah, nuclear plant, 2 units there, as is typical for nuclear plants. Accident at Unit 1, which has gotten so much publicity over the years, that closed that back in 1979. And that's remained closed ever since. But Unit 2, after a while, started operation again and has continued to operate at least until 2019. In 2019, the owners of the plant, Exelon, made a decision to close it because at that time, the conditions in the power market, the electricity markets, were very tough for generators. With all of the gas coming in from Marcellus Shale, with natural gas being an important fuel to generate electricity, the nuclear plants had trouble competing with them back then. Demand for electricity was flat. The owners of the plant, Exelon at the time, tried to get some state subsidies in order to stay open.
Right.
That did happen in a number of other states, including Illinois, New Jersey, and New York. But they were not successful in getting that through the legislature here. We're a big natural gas state, as you know, and they were not able to get those subsidies. So at that time they said, we're losing money on this plant. We don't see prospects for making money. We're going to close the plant. And TMI had a problem that other nuclear plants didn't, in that there's a lot of safety regulations, a lot of expense. They only had the 1 unit to spread those costs over.
Right.
Most nuclear plants have two. So for all those reasons, they closed in 2019.
But that's all changing now, 2024.
It's amazing. It's amazing what's happened. And of course, they have the contract that was announced last week between the owners. Now it's Constellation Energy with Microsoft to sell the output from TMI to power these data centers, which use a tremendous amount of electricity.
Plan to reopen, can I say that?
They have a contract to reopen in, I think, 2028. Now, will that actually happen? Well, if everything goes according to plan, it will. They do have to get permission to do that from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that's a safety regulation there. So there's a lot that they'll have to do to the plant, to upgrade it, to make sure that it's safe. If all of that goes according to plan, that big if there, but if it does, the plan is to reopen it in 2028.
And there's regulation hurdles that have to be dealt with?
Yes, there are. The big one being the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Right.
They also have to get permission again to connect the plant to the regional grid, to PJM. That's a little bit of an issue because there's a backlog in PJM getting things connected. That's mostly due to the number of renewable energy projects, which are smaller. So you have a number of those. It's been difficult for PJM to get them all processed. So I noticed last week Governor Shapiro, I think, wrote a letter to PJM asking for their consideration to make sure that this plant, that reopening doesn't get delayed because of this interconnection issue.
Yeah, this is extremely important, I think, and it was fiercely debated when it occurred.
Yes, yes.
And the reopening, when it gets, is that likely to be debated again too?
Well, we will have some debate over that. I mean, there is there are groups in the area, of course, who remember the original accident and all of the anxiety that caused. Some of those folks are still, they have a very sincere, opposition to nuclear power, and they're going to fight that. Whether they'll be successful, I think they probably won't. I think there's been part of what's helping TMI reopen now is, I think, a growing awareness that with climate change, you know, we need plants, a reliable plant in particular, that can operate 24/7 that doesn't emit carbon.
We're going to run to a break. When we get back, I want to talk about some unfinished business before the Pennsylvania legislature affecting electric and natural gas utilities. These are all very important to the consumers after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Yeah, welcome back. I'm talking with Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. And the legislature only has a few weeks, and then they're done for the full year, and then we'll have to start a new session after the election with new members.
That's correct.
So let's go back to the unfinished business affecting natural gas utilities, electric and natural gas utilities. What are they?
Well, there's at least two bills, two pieces of legislation that have what's called a sunset provision in them. That means they have a specific timeline that they're in effect, and they expire at the end of that time unless they're reauthorized by the General Assembly. There's two pieces, as you said, two laws there. One is the call before you dig law, the one call law.
Right.
That's very important, of course, for safety.
Is that call before you dig? Call before you dig.
Correct. Dial 811 to make sure that the utilities come out and mark where their lines are to make sure that that those lines aren't hit, because that can cause a loss of utility service.
Absolutely.
It can also be a safety issue, particularly with natural gas lines. Very, very important. There are some, I would characterize them as technical issues there with regard to reauthorization, with regard to how the Public Utility Commission enforces that law. But I don't see those issues being so significant that we can't reach agreement here and get it reauthorized.
Where does the unfinished business stand in the legislature right now?
Well, there are laws, there are bills that are in process. I think the Senate has passed a bill out of committee on that. The House is going to move a bill too. Eventually, the leaders of the Senate and House will have to come together and decide which bill is going to move in order to get that done. The second law that I was talking about that needs to be reauthorized is the law that governs utility collection process. Yeah. That's a little bit more controversial, because that sort of pits folks who think about the average customer who pays their bills versus the interest of customers who
the one call
fall behind. No, that is it's called Chapter 14 of the Public Utility Code.
Yeah.
It governs the utilities collection process regarding termination, how many notices you have to give to a customer, how long you have to give somebody to pay a balance back if they fall behind. And there's a lot of controversy over that, because advocates particularly for low-income customers, are trying to protect those customers. Now, from the standpoint of utilities, we think, well, it's good to protect those customers, but there's a balance here, because if you put too many roadblocks and obstacles in the collections process, you end up creating tools that some people will use to try to avoid paying. That hurts all customers, because that bad debt expense is part of what the utilities recover. And the average customer also pays for low-income assistance programs. So there's a balance there that has to be achieved.
Call before you dig?
Yes. Call before you dig. It's very important to remember that. You know, big safety issue.
And who do you call?
You call, well, there's a Pennsylvania one-call system that operates that. They coordinate, they take the calls, and then they put the message out to the utilities. So you'll have gas utilities coming out, electric, water, wastewater, cable, all coming out to mark where their lines are to make sure that there aren't any hits.
This is complicated, isn't it?
It is. But it's very important to protect the safety.
Hugely important for safety and for our own energy supply, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's move away and talk about the election and energy.
Sure. Yes.
What's the high points?
Well, you know, it's become a big issue in the election. I think former President Trump is raising that.
Right.
He's criticizing Vice President Harris, saying that, you know, making a big deal of the fact that in 2019, when she was a candidate for president, she had said that she would ban fracking. Now, she changed her position on that. I think as part of her campaign with President Biden, she said, well, I no longer believe that. I do believe in protecting the environment. I believe in getting to net zero emissions, but we can do that and still have fracking. So she's changed her position on that. But, you know, the former President Trump keeps going back to her original statement, you know, that she would ban fracking, just to kind of cast suspicion on where she stands on developing energy.
Yeah, this gets complicated because, make no mistake about it, whether you're for or against energy production, Pennsylvania historically has been a big energy state. Coal, iron, steel, the whole bit.
Yes, absolutely. And then the latest development there, of course, was natural gas. You know, the development of the Marcellus Shale starting about 15 years ago. Terry, in my career, that has probably been the biggest single energy development that's occurred, because all of those gas supplies have really lowered prices for customers for both your natural gas service, but also your electricity service, because natural gas is an important fuel used to generate electricity. So yes, it's very important. You know, politicians of both parties support fracking. Now, the Republicans support it a little bit more strongly than Democrats do.
And where does fracking take place in our state?
It's mostly the northern tier and the western part of the state. That's where the Marcellus Shale deposit is.
In the more rural areas of the state?
Yes, generally more rural. There are some places where it comes pretty close to suburban, even urban areas. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is that energy has been a huge issue in this state. Business and labor, and you know, some groups strongly in favor of it, and environmentalists expressing concern.
Yes, we generate more electricity. For example, in the regional grid, we are far and away the largest generator of electricity, and we export more than any other state does. So we're important. It's important not just for Pennsylvania, but really for the entire region.
Yeah, and that's only going to get grow in its significance, isn't it?
Absolutely. Development of gas, also, you know, being able to generate electricity, very important.
Yeah. Is there anything likely to happen in the next month or so with energy?
Well, I think the issues, they're going to keep hitting the same issues that they're hitting now. Now, there's always the possibility that something will happen. You know, you could do something that causes electric outages. You could have an explosion, something like that. But barring that,
you have an assignment to come back and keep us updated on these energy
Happy
topics.
to do that, Terry.
See you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.